Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, lace up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps.
Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 142 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So as I record this, it's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day. If you've listened to me all the years I've had the podcast or watched me on the socials, you know that holidays are tricky for me. This isn't new news to those of you that listen to me on the daily. But ever since I started recognizing Bereaved Mother's Day, which takes place a week before this Mother's Day, I have much more open space in my heart to celebrate this one. I didn't know there was a such thing as Bereaved Mother's Day until I lost Molly. And actually, Molly went to the ER in 2016 on Bereaved Mother's Day. That's a strong connection to me now. And so for years, I just didn't want any acknowledgement at all. And Kenny and Gracie were great about that. They didn't acknowledge it. But as the time's gone by, we all sort of want to, bring back in things that we like. And, holidays, even if they're just Hallmark holidays, are nice ways to, call someone out on something they're doing so well or recognize somebody or whatever. So Kenny and Gracie and Jack got me flowers and, plants actually, and a card. And it's wonderful. So I can have space in it for Mother's Day and not just feel so angry and terrified by it like I used to. Doesn't mean it's easy, but I understand that I'm still Molly's mother and I'm still baby Gordy's mother. So Mother's Day becomes easier. This leads into my topic for today quite well, actually, because holidays like Mother's Day often have people get together. Families get together for brunch, or they have a cookout, or just a family gathering or a visit. Any sort of one-on-one or small group or large group interaction with people outside of your family or your workspace is an important piece of overall health. A little bit back, a few podcast episodes back, I was talking about how sometimes I felt incredibly lonely, that even though I know hundreds of people, that sometimes if I just need to call on someone for a favor or help, I don't have anyone, no one comes to mind right away. One or two people maybe, but I sometimes feel like I'm calling on the same people over and over again to help me. And so I talked about how sometimes I feel incredibly lonely, like lonely in a crowded room. And because I have this fabulous podcast editor, he sent me an article that he found that was inspired by what I said, or he sent it to me because of what I said. It was in a magazine called the Massachusetts Daily Collegian, and it was written by a woman named Catherine Varnell. And it talks about third spaces, having a third space. So when you look at life, first space is family. So your first space is who you're married to or who you live with, children if you have them. If you're a child, your first space is your parents and where you live. Your family, those who you are related to or adopted by or fostered by, or when you're an adult, the people that you choose to be your family, that's your first space or first place. And then your second space or second place is work, your work community. When I was teaching, every day I was in a school full of people. I was with teachers, I was with students. When I taught at Walker School, it was a relatively intimate community. I knew the names of everybody in that building. When I got to Concord High, it was much bigger, but again, surrounded all day by people of all ages and interests and ethnicities and beliefs and stuff. So when you come home at the end of the day, you've been surrounded face to face with people. And then your third space or your third place is the social piece, the piece that isn't connected to your family or to your work. This is an area in American lifestyle anyway, that has been diminishing for decades. I think COVID sped it up and created this level of social distancing that continues in many ways now. I don't know that that's a good thing. So I got to thinking about it. I read the article and it talked about really that a third space or a third place is a place with no expectation. It's a community building and support place. So it should not rely on money, because a lot of third spaces that come to mind for me are gym memberships, or a club membership, or places that you have to pay money, like you join a running club or you join a basketball league or you join a choir. Church can be a third space because that's a religious It's a group setting that doesn't cost money. You can go there and you're surrounded by people that share your beliefs. So I got to thinking about myself as a child, because the first thing it talked about in this article was how third space experiences are vanishing. 2 or 3 generations ago, kids went outside to play and they went to parks, and parks were full of kids, and not necessarily adults, just kids, communing with kids and playing all day and spending time at parks and public spaces. And now you get a group of kids out in a public place and people are immediately worried. Are they loitering? Are they juvenile delinquents? What are all these kids doing unsupervised? We have this very, very structured level of society now where a lot of third space activities are for those who can afford them. Signing your kids up for soccer leagues and theater camps and dance camps and lessons and all of this. I got to thinking about when I was a child. And, my childhood, again, is divided by before abuse starting and then living with the abuse and then after it ended and living that way. And I had, for all the dysfunction in my home wasn't always an unhappy place. And for the most part, I felt safe there. And my family is close, my extended family. So there was always interaction with extended family. So I never felt like my home, my first place, which was home, and my second place, which was school, not, work. Those were positive experiences for me. And then I lived in a neighborhood where when you came home from school, you went into your house, you changed out of your school clothes into your play clothes, and you went outside to play. And you just walked around. There was no set up play dates. It was just you went outside and you played. You played in your yard. You went to someone else's house and played in their yard. It was never sort of a set up, planned, ask your mom if I can come over kind of thing. Kids just ended up together. So when my abuse started and my whole perception of the world changed, what I found was my third space activities became much more of a lifeline for me. Home was no longer safe, and school changed drastically for me because my mindset was so different that my behavior at school must have been different. And I really started to struggle with social groups and not being popular and just really feeling like I didn't fit in. And I think that's a byproduct of abuse. But I had them. I had violin lessons and piano lessons and Girl Scouts and church choir and swim team at night. And then on the weekends, I was always going to play with Suzanne or going to someone's house and spending as much time out of my house as I could. And those experiences and relationships became a lifeline for me. And I know that my friendships became much more necessary. Like when I think back to my friendships prior to really the abuse really taking hold of me, I loved all my friends and they were my friends. And if one friend couldn't play, I could go play with another. But I began to be very, very reliant on the friends. Like if somebody was mad at me, I would go into a bit of a panic because the thought of not having them as a friend was terrifying to me. So I think it was a bit of safety disappearing. Well, when I went through the phase of when I told about the abuse and I knew it was going to end, I was heavily involved in gymnastics. And I remember my mother sent me to gymnastics camp sort of as a gift, a 2-week gift. And I insisted on staying the whole summer. And it wasn't about gymnastics so much as I wasn't home. I was away, just surrounded by girls and boys my age, primarily girls, at this gymnastics camp. And again, I had tremendous growth the 2 summers I spent there. Then I went to high school and initially it was cheerleading and I was, the gymnastics wasn't working. I tried, but I really was not talented at it. I tried tennis lessons. I wasn't talented at that either. And then I found running and I was good at it and I was good at it immediately. And not only was I good at it, I was great at it. And suddenly my track and field and cross country community and the road racing community became my full-time third space. It was where I received so much love and support and so much safety, quite honestly, and such an amazing way to reconcile the love-hate relationship I had with my body. In my life as a young person going off to college, my third space activities were incredibly important and incredibly meaningful and helpful in my life. And they're face-to-face. There was no social media back in the day. And so if you wanted meaningful communication, it had to be face-to-face. I'm recording this on Sunday. I have a Molly B Foundation meeting tonight. It will be on Zoom. Yes, we all can talk to each other, but we aren't in the same room and it is different. Zoom is now convenient because all of us are so busy that to have to drive into Concord for a meeting, an in-person meeting, I don't have time. I can sneak up here and do it on my computer with Jack and Kenny and Gracie downstairs, and I can run a foundation meeting just fine. The in-person third space has suffered greatly in the years since the pandemic really sort of separated everybody. One of the biggest things in the article that was mentioned about why third space activities are diminishing and how detrimental that is to the physical, social, spiritual, emotional health and well-being of everybody is time. Inflation goes up. A 40-hour job with one spouse and the other spouse home raising the kids doesn't work anymore. You can't even afford a dumpy apartment on a single family income with kids now. Both people have to work. You're working 40 or 50 hours, maybe 60 hours to pay the bills for where you live. And then your family time is all you have left for. You don't want to work 50 hours a week and come home and then not see your kids. So lots of social activities that used to occur, for example, stay-at-home moms, get the kids off to school, get the husband off to work. The number of moms that would get together for card games or watching TV shows in the afternoon or going to the park with their babies. It was all this in-person hanging out together that didn't have to be planned or signed up for because it was just a part of life. So as we have become more focused on work and career, and as we have become more, and when I say we, I mean sort of society, more focused on material belongings and having that big fancy house and sort of living up to the expectation, the third space activities disappear. And in my life, I can see it even more. So, however, these statistics are gleaned, I think sometimes it's census questions, maybe it's just questionnaires that are sent out by the government, I'm not sure. But loneliness by American citizens has gone up every year since 1975. So the level of people who say they feel lonely is increasing. So when you think about taking away modern conveniences, take away cars, take away power, or take away internet and Wi-Fi and telephones. So if all of those things disappeared and I had to walk everywhere, you can bet your bottom dollar I'd get out of this house as soon as I could and walk there. I'd walk to the store. I'd walk downtown. I'd walk to the park because if there were no way to communicate with anybody from inside my house, I would want to get out of my house, right? And I think my family communications would be a lot more meaningful. So I think about the fact that social media and internet access and Zoom and FaceTime allows us to communicate with anyone, anywhere in the world in an instant. That sounds unifying, but it takes away the come over to my house and sit at my table and break bread with me personal piece of the interaction. So Gen Zers, this was in the article as well, which is interesting. Gen Zers are a generation who are much more concerned with how they are perceived than Gen X and Boomers. And that plays a big role in the flavor and the shape of third space activities. Having a fancy house and having a really important job become far more important than time for hanging out with your friends in the backyard or just creating social time for yourself that isn't centered around activities for your children, school, and those sorts of things. As somebody that's a boomer Gen X right on the line, my birth date puts me in the boomer generation, but I am so not a boomer. I think my brother, who's 3 years older than me, he's much more boomer mentality than I am. When I see things on social media around Gen X children and everything listed, that's my childhood. I do know that when I graduated college, my third space all through college had been track and field and cross country and running, Nike Boston. So my desire to maintain the connection with running was as much about wanting to maintain connections as it was about running. I loved running, but I also loved the connections that it made for me. And it was a big transition for me when I finally got a full-time teaching job to realize that I was making a transition in my life, that I was going away from sort of the student slash runner lifestyle and moving into the get a full-time job, adulting, so to speak, lifestyle. When I left Boston and moved up to Concord for ostensibly for 1 year, my main focus was to get healthy, to stop drinking so much, to pay off a lot of debt, to sort of focus on saving money. It was just like a reset for me. And I noticed right away that one of the first things that was hard for me was how lonely I became. My entire social crew was still in Boston, although everyone was starting to move away and spread out. I lived with my parents, so I didn't have the ability to really entertain anybody. Even though I was, 26 years old, I was, or 27 maybe, I was, living with my parents who were in their late 40s at the time, which seemed so old to me at the time. It's so weird. I remember I would pack a bag in the morning and I would go teach all day and then I would go to the Y and I would stretch and I would go running. And I typically ran by myself. as I began running and meeting people at the Y anyway, I started to find people that I could run with. And I started having folks to run with. But again, I had a very hard time establishing a third space for myself. During my first 2 years back in Concord, I did theater. I did the Victorian Society of New Hampshire. We did Pirates of Penzance and Trial by Jury, two Gilbert and Sullivan Victorian musicals. It was a blast. And I generated a friend group. I met Chaz and then I met Graham. And so in those two dating relationships, I met friends of theirs and created a more of a broad social group for me. But I find, and I wonder sometimes if this is a defense mechanism for myself, that oftentimes I dive so deeply into my job that I don't foster or cultivate or care for my contemporary relationship. So let me explain what that means. When I was teaching at Second Start and I met a student named Meg, she was seriously mentally ill and living in a locked facility for a while and then, with her family and then on her own. And I spent probably 35 to 40 hours a week with her. So here I am, 27. I'm spending 30 hours a week with a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old. I enjoyed it and loved it, but it was every spare minute I had. I wasn't cultivating friendships. I wasn't focusing on relationships. I was taking a piece of my second space, my work, and devoting all of my energy into giving, giving, giving. Now, do I regret that? No. But I remember my parents and some of the people my age questioning, like, why do you spend every spare minute doing that? Like, when do you have time for yourself? And I thought, well, I go running. That's time for myself. And it was my running and working out was what I thought was my alone time. But when I look back on it now, I realize that I do this and that sometimes I can lose friends and hurt the feelings of friends by not really cultivating third space relationships. When I started teaching in the Concord School District and coaching, I did the same thing. I would teach all day and then I would coach my runners. And then I would take unbelievable interest in the lives of my runners and the quality of my team. So every weekend, pasta parties, creating events for them on the weekends, sort of social team bonding events that would take up my entire Saturday. I would spend hours going over their times and organizing booklets for them and writing tribunes. And I remember when I married Eric, he would get very frustrated by this. All you do is look at those numbers. You're just always looking at numbers. And I took offense to it at the time because I felt like, well, it's my job. I love this. I make my money doing this. I could have done far less and still been a great coach. I just didn't see it that way. I just didn't process it in my mind. But I do believe it's a defense mechanism for me in regard to third space relationships. So a lot of this comes from being the product of a child abused sexually. When somebody that you love and trust treats you in this way, it takes away any sort of ability to predict what somebody who may or may not be safe, what safe even means, and how to define how relationships are appropriate. So I think what my tendency to do is to dive into helping somebody. Here, let me help you. Let me help you. I'll do that. Let me help you. And it becomes this overbearing, I think, thing of me being this overly helpful person, but I develop these relationships with the people I'm helping that I love. But I, in the meantime, don't pay attention to those who also might appreciate some love for me. So I remember in my years coaching, Jack, this guy that I grew up with, he did a lot of coaching as well. He started a track club, Concord Flyers. And I remember one time him calling me selfish, and I couldn't understand why he could call me selfish. And he had kept asking, we need to go out for breakfast. Let's get together. Let's talk about things. And I can't, well, come, I'm having a team breakfast. He was a part of everything I did, but sometimes he just wanted time to cultivate our relationship, like our friendship and our coaching relationship. And I would put it off, and he would get really frustrated. So in the process of thinking about this episode and also talking to Carolina about this very thing, and she saw into it right away, a lot of my standoffishness around friendships and really cultivating them or diving headfirst into them in a really unhealthy manner comes from a lot of the fallout of being abused and how I am quick to jump into relationships that I know will hurt me, not because I'm looking to be hurt, but because there's a familiarity to the kind of manipulation and control that those relationships can bring. And I get sucked right in. So I've talked a lot about my propensity for people with narcissistic traits or very sociopathic manipulative traits. And it makes perfect sense. I remember when I lost my teaching job And I dove into this relationship and friendship with Robin. And again, it took every spare minute of my time. She was my one and only, and all my friends were her friends. And it was a very one-sided, now that I look back on it, friendship. And I would have jumped off a bridge for her had she said, jump off this bridge. And that's sometimes what it takes in these friendships. In my friendship with Amy, when they first moved to Concord, I had a nice social group. And then I figured, oh, here's this new person. She lives in this neighborhood. She'll be a part of the group. And what I noticed was all the other mothers stayed away from her. And the tighter we got, the more they stayed away from me. And it took me a long time to see that once again, I'd sort of been sucked into something very unhealthy. And then, of course, we all know when I ended that friendship and Roy came back, it was the same thing. I got very, very sucked into, I had my family life here, my work, my coaching, and then just helping him with all that he was going through. And eventually I sort of lost everything in that process. This is a very, very classic example of unhealthy third space behavior. And so what am I trying to say in this podcast? There are so many things that factor into third space, and we don't now live in a society that focuses on creating acceptable, usable, easy third space experiences. Most of them now cost money. I remember I'd go out for dinner every 3 or 4 months with 3 of my middle school friends, where we've been friends all these years. And we'd get together and we catch up on everybody and we have dinner. But the 3 of them had very constant relationships during their marriages. They belonged to book clubs together. They had, once a month wine parties and going away together. And I wasn't included in any of this. That's not because they were consciously keeping me out. I wasn't involved in their social group and in their social dynamic. When I was raising Gracie and Molly, I was completely involved with coaching and teaching, hours and hours and hours away from them. Thank God for my mother. And then when I lost my job, I was completely and utterly swallowed up by Robin and Roy. That was it. And so if I had any social interaction, it was them and what they created. In post-COVID times, I'm hoping that not just me, but we'll get back to in-person activities. I mean, downtown Concord is as busy as ever now. Restaurants are filling up again, like in-person classes are filling up. So I feel like life is in some ways getting much more back to in-person socially normal. For me as well, another third space reality for me is that sometimes the jobs I had created amazing socialization. Timing a road race. Once everything is set up, there's ample time to meet people and socialize and talk and share. When you're working the finish line of a road race, you spend 2 hours at a half marathon or a marathon, 3 hours, 4 hours, chatting with all the people working at the finish line with you. Wonderful communication and conversation back and forth. So in looking at my life and in looking back over my social interactions and realizing that so much of my free time has been spent with the people I'm teaching or coaching or helping, it really got me thinking on what I can do now as a 60-year-old mother of a 3-year-old with a 68-year-old partner and a 23-year-old daughter. Where do I fit in? And if I go to a mom's group, I'm old enough to be everyone's mom. When I go to the gym, I'm the oldest one in the gym. So sometimes my age sets me apart. So do I go hang out at retirement centers? Do I go out to eat at 4 p.m. with all the other senior citizens who want to go to bed at 7, right? What do I do? And so I went running today with my friend Pam. So Pam is someone that I met at CrossFit. She came into it in 2018. She's a runner. She came from a running background as well. She's lived in the Concord area all her life. She's worked at a massive insurance company here that is now remote, right? Used to be in person. Once COVID hit and they went remote, that company realized, dang, we can save a ton of money just by having everyone work from home. So now suddenly, even though she's on the phone all day talking to people, she can't see these people, their clients and customers. She's by herself all day. So we go running once a week and I love it. It's painful and I'm not nearly the runner I used to be. But, we always try to work out together at the gym when we're both working out on the same day. We go to the same class and we have started now running once a week. And always somewhere in the run, one of us will thank the other. Thank you, Pam, for running with me. Thank you so much. Or she'll say it to me. Thank you, Barb. This is really meaningful. So today I told her about the fact that I was going to record this podcast and talk about third space activities. And we got chatting and she right away said that the thing that she missed the most that made her sort of crazy in her head is that she used to get up and shower and pack a lunch and go to work. And she was in a building with hundreds of people and she would walk onto her floor and she would say hi to people. She had a whole community of people that she was with. And even though she spent most of her time on the phone and doing work, In between times, she was talking to people. They got together and ate lunch together. They were together in a place all together. Most large companies now are remote, either all remote or part time remote, where maybe you go in a couple of days a week. And she sees drastically how bad that's been for her mental health. So she gets up after sitting at her desk all day in her living room and goes to the gym. And that's her only social interaction. So the 2 or 3 people she sees at the gym might be the only people she sees all day long. So she's been working really hard to cultivate friendships. She has somebody that she walks with. So our runs, today's run was when we could talk, was really spent talking about this, that what we were cultivating with each other was a friendship geared on things we have in common, CrossFit, running. But hopefully now, as we continue to do these things together, maybe one day we'll go and have coffee together, or hey, let's go out and have a drink, or let's go for dinner. We're going to go to Boston and do the run to remember on Memorial Day. So there's a sort of a social event we're doing together, running in a race. But I realize that my third space activities are incredibly limited. So this got me thinking about Jack, who has no third space activities yet at age 3. He does dance and, we bring him to things. We signed up for this little Healthy Kids Running. So that starts today and we'll take him to that. But I look at Gracie and how her third space activities were decimated when Molly died. They were together all the time and their friends were all the same group of people. And when Molly died, everything changed. And, not surprisingly, we spent a lot of time isolating ourselves because it was just easier to be alone and sad than it was to be in a group of people. And social media really came along to save us. In the years since Molly has died, so all of Gracie's high school years, and then all of her college age years, and now she has worked really hard to create and maintain friendships, and she has amazing friendships. And she's very good at creating time to spend with her, to spend with her friends. She has a group of friends from her teaching class at, early childhood teaching, and a couple of friends from college that they stay together and they communicate. Her best friend, Erin, that she's been friends with since 7th grade, they make time for each other all the time. This is of great relief to me. I look at Kenny and how his physical health was so terrible, and then Molly died. He really has minimal to no third space activities whatsoever. He gets up, he puts about, takes care of Jack, he does chores around the house. I think he can go days and days without visiting anybody. And I can be hard on Kenny sometime because I want him to do things for me and get things done so I can, continue to create podcasts and make money and all this. And I realize that there are times when he just needs socialization. He has a friend group, but again, they're not nearby. They don't get together all the time. His physical health has gotten in the way of a lot of his activities. But I think a third space activities for Kenny are incredibly important. And a lot of this comes to me as I'm talking. So I'm going to wrap it up here a little bit. And what I'm curious about is, as you all listen to this and think about all the things you're involved in, so for me, it's podcasting and writing the book and pushing the book and coaching CrossFit, which is my in-person connection, working out, going running, planning Molly's birthday gala, managing the Molly Beef Foundation, organizing meetings, school board, and all the hours that go into that. I have a very, very full life. Do I spend enough time with my friend Polly? I do not. Do I spend enough time with Pam? Only because we work out together and we create our Sunday morning activities and routines so that we are together. I do not spend enough time cultivating third space activities. Everything for me right now in my mind needs to be attached to something that moves me forward. So I don't know what that means for me. But I am curious to know, as you listen, what you think your third space activities are. Where do you find connection and, feeling like you fit in? That was such a big piece of Molly's anxiety, was not always feeling like she fit in and realizing that she fit in everywhere. And that was better than only fitting in one little place. So it's interesting to me. I come away anytime I listen to a new podcast or read a new book, I come away with another way of looking at life. And I think that's what this is for me now, as I sit here by myself, looking out my windows at my neighborhood and realizing that creating third space activities is incredibly important. So I'd love to hear back from all of you. So mind, body, spirit, right? Family, work, fun. We all have to balance all of the things that we do, and balance, homeostasis, finding it in life. I think sometimes we can lose sight of that when we're so hyper-focused on one thing. So anyway, thank you for listening. I always feel like I'm all over the place, so I hope this is not too difficult to follow. But I would recommend you read the article. It's by Catherine Varnell from the Massachusetts Daily Collegian. And it was an incredible article about how we spend our time and how we do or don't focus on friendships and relationships. So anyway, be good to yourself. Call up a friend and go for a walk. Be good to someone else. Call up that friend and go for a walk. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.